I'm David Speedy, Director of the Program on U.S. Global Engagement here at the Carnegie Council. And I want obviously first to join our good friend Rita Hauser in welcoming Secretary Hagel. It's a great honor as well as a pleasure to have you here, sir. Let's start with, speaking of U.S. global engagement, in the election campaign of 2008 that brought President Obama to office, in the campaign, every candidate, including Senator McCain on the Republican side, was talking about restoring America's moral authority, re-engaging with the world, and so on and so forth. 7 years on in what the president describes as the fourth quarter of his presidency, how do you think we've done on that score, re-engaging with the world?
Well, I think you begin with, as always you must, is a clear understanding of the world that a president is dealing with. You began in January of 2009 in the kind of problems this president inherited, which I think are as still today, and certainly were then, as significant as any president in the history of this country. I think you'd have to go back to probably the days of FDR and certainly Lincoln to really catalog and inventory the kind of issues that this president had to deal with when he came into office. So I would start there, David, with, and this is for every president inherits problems. You ask for the job, you want the job, you get the problems. So if you begin in 2009, as we were unwinding two unprecedented long wars, one the longest war we've ever been in, 13 years eventually of unprecedented two wars. America's never been in a war that long. Probably more significant than that, the unprecedented dynamic as to who fought those wars. America has never fought wars with an all-volunteer force. And the consequences of that force and that dimension on our young men and women today is still severe. And there's a manifestation of that clear across the board, whether our men and women are out of uniform or still in uniform. The stress that it's put these people under. You cannot take these young people, as smart and good and disciplined as they are, and send them back into combat situations 5 and 6 and sometimes 7 tours at a time. I mean, human beings are human beings. But the reason I started with the answers I did, not just the inventory of problems, but with the two wars that we're coming out of. Those are important dimensions in answering your question, because through one lens, there is a view that because we unwound and worked our way out of two wars, that was less engagement. Well, the reality is, for 2 years I served as Secretary of Defense, up until February of this year, the reality is that we're in more places today, our American military, than we've ever been in before. We either are more forward deployed or troops stationed in over 150 locations in the world. I'll give you another real-life assessment of this. When I was Secretary of Defense in 2 years, I made 6 major trips to the Asia-Pacific area. When I say major, at least 12, 13 days. As you all know, when you go that far, you stay. I actually took more trips to the Asia-Pacific and spent more time than the Secretary of State did. I wasn't there to build up navies or air forces. What I was doing is, in confluence with President Obama's rebalancing and shifting of asset bases based on our interests to the Asia-Pacific, was engaging, helping build more capacity, more structure, more capability for our allies, building and developing stronger and in some cases new alliances, for example in Australia. Some people find this hard to believe because Australia has been such a tremendous ally of ours. I mean, Australia and America are truly in every way cousins. We all started as a bunch of horse thieves, I think. But we now have a rotational presence in Australia for Marines. But we've never, ever had any, other than World War II, we've never had any troops on Australian soil. What we're doing in Singapore with our littoral combat ships, a new port there, rotational. We have been able to re-engage the Philippines and use those bases again when the Philippines ordered us out of there 20 years ago, not stationing troops. So by any measurement you look at an engagement, I think we're as engaged in the world today as we've ever been, certainly post-World War II. And it doesn't mean we're back in wars or in different measurements of that, but I feel pretty comfortable where we are.
And on this question of the use of power, the use of American power, you said, and I think I'm quoting you directly in the context of Guantanamo, it's identifiable with, right or wrong, a part of America that people in the world believe is a power and empire that pushes people around. We don't live up always to our commitment to multilateral institutions. You also added somewhat, perhaps ruefully, I suspect I did not make everyone very happy with that comment.
Well, I did say it, and I believe it, and here's why I believe it. I believe that in the modern history of man, that one of the most deciding, defining, important decisions, and there were a series of them made by world leaders, was after World War II, when our world leaders built these great coalitions of common interests, these institutions, the United Nations, IMF, World Bank, collective security, most principal among them, NATO, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which is now WTO. The world had never seen anything like that. And it was predicated on a common interest of nations, of people. I mean, when you really strip us all down, take the religious dimension out of us, and democracy versus monarchy, so on, and strip it all away. I mean, we are human beings. And there are certain dimensions of every human being that we require. And I have found in my travels all over the world, and I've been to probably 150 countries, I'm not an expert on any of it, but I don't care what your religion is or any part of what you think philosophically. Most people I have ever met, everywhere in the world, and I've been to all the continents, they still value their families. There are certain things that are endearing to them that transcend everything else. So institutions are also imperfect, and that's another dynamic I think that we tend to overlook sometimes. The United Nations can't fix every problem. NATO can't fix every problem. I do think that in a world of 7 billion global citizens living in a global community, underpinned by a global economy, these institutions are going to play more and more of a critical role in just trying to sort problems out. If you don't have those venues, if you don't have those forums, if you don't have those abilities, those stages to be able to deal with these big problems, then what is the alternative to remedying or getting close to a remedy? I don't think any of the alternatives are very attractive.
You mentioned the Middle East, and this is another area where you've spoken out forcefully and with conscience, I think, over the years. And you said at one point that to be forced to choose between a relationship with Israel and those with Arab Muslims, including Palestine, is, quote, an irresponsible, dangerous, false choice. How difficult has it been to speak out as you have done on perhaps the most emotional issue for U.S. foreign policy?
When you are a member of a president's team, a member of his cabinet, and you are in an administration, your opinion is secondary to what the president's is in the end. Now, you can give the president your opinion privately, National Security Council meetings, but it is vastly, vastly different being Secretary of Defense versus being an independent senator. A United States senator essentially has no responsibilities. And I say that as endearing as I can. I mean, we don't run anything. We don't have, I mean, you keep your constituents happy enough to get reelected, and But you take cabinet members, they run cabinet departments. So the answer to your question is, I always spoke very freely to the President in National Security Council meetings about my positions, but the President sets the course on all relationships. So regardless of what you think, if you want to stay in the cabinet, if you agree that that's the position, that's the position. And you state it as the position of the administration. I never felt conflicted with that because, for one thing, I think President Obama and I have a pretty similar view of a lot of things in the Middle East, especially our relationship with Israel. I used to say when I'd get hammered that I would speak up for the Palestinians or the Arabs, that we ought to listen to them. I mean, that has nothing to do with whether I supported Israel or not. And as I said during my confirmation hearing, I mean, you will never find in my 12 years in the Senate one vote I voted against Israel. But not to have an opportunity to question a government's policies, there's something wrong with that. That's not a democracy. Because you question a government's policies doesn't mean you're anti-American. If I question the policies of the United States or any American, doesn't mean I love this country less than anybody else. Same thing with any other country. If you question a leader's judgment, if you question the policies of a government, that's different from questioning the people of a country. So I think it is important in democracies to get a full, fair, honest airing. And I don't think any elected official should ever put themselves in a position to be held captive to another country's interests. And I think you do a great disservice, in fact, you fail your own country, if you don't ask the questions you think need to be asked. Not to be critical. We've gone too far on that side, I think, in this country with the media and with the Congress, and we're going to see it more and more. This country's going to have to go through presidential debates and so on. You do a great disservice to the country when you don't ask those tough questions, and you need to bring them out, and that's part of leadership.
On the Congress, obviously it goes without saying that the atmosphere seems to be almost venomously partisan at this point. And again, there's so many great quotes, you see, it's easy to ask you questions because all I have to do is quote you and ask for elaboration. But you put it really succinctly and I think quite beautifully. The problem with Washington, if you disagree with someone, you have to dislike them too. And it hasn't always been that way, has it?
No, it hasn't. I tried never, ever, ever to let any differences that I had with any of my colleagues ever get personal. Unfortunately, I think that's happened for a lot of reasons. When I got to the Senate in 1996, I had the great privilege and opportunity to serve with really giants, Democrats and Republicans. And the ones that I admired most, who are now all gone from the Senate, and which has really changed the Senate and the Congress, all the World War II generation leaders are gone. The World War II generations held it together in a way that I now, as I reflect back daily, and see how important those World War II generation leaders were, because they were always grounded by a higher responsibility to govern and to make things work. Now, Ted Kennedy would be on the floor of the Senate at 11 o'clock at night raising holy hell. And I rarely voted with Ted Kennedy. He and I became very good friends. I admired his passion, his belief. But he would walk off that Senate floor and he'd put his arm around whoever it was he was raising hell with, and they'd laugh, and he said, let's go have a drink, let's figure this out. How are we going to make this work? This absolutism of our politics today is that you're always wrong and I'm always right. That's been bubbling and developing. Partly it's a It's also a result of now of a segmented marketing option on cable television. You can find whatever TV, radio, talk show fits you pretty well, whether it's Rush or it's O'Reilly or whether it's Rachel Maddow on the left. And what that's done, it's polarized us because we don't listen to each other. And you just, like robots, listen to Rachel or to O'Reilly, and you damn right they're right. I mean, these buffoons over here, and then we mock people that we don't agree with. And I didn't see that. That's not the way I was grounded when I got to the Senate. John Warner and John Chafee, Moynihan, Kennedy, Byrd, Republicans and Democrats, Dole was coming out. I mean, they were just a different breed. And I would always marvel in our Tuesday luncheons, each caucus has a Democrat-Republican luncheon. And some of the younger senators would get up in the Republican caucus. It happened in the Democratic caucus too. And they'd start raising hell about some wild thing they wanted to do, and, well, let's show the president or whatever they were going to do. And Ted Stevens or John Warner or one of these guys would listen, and they'd get up at the end and say, now, we ought to just think about this a little bit. Now, if you really want to do that, now think about where all that's going to go. And everybody kind of calm down, calm down. And it get almost the crazy ideas get derailed. That doesn't happen these days. The crazy ideas are the prominent ideas now, the ones that hold forth, because there's no leadership that's strong enough, in the sense, not that there aren't good people, there are good people in this business, but the respect of a World War II leader, generation leader, was significant. And we don't have that same kind of thing today. Now, it's not anybody's fault who's there now, and you've got expectations now that drive things. The media, technology, this breakdown in just good manners. Our mothers and fathers always taught us about good manners. We don't listen to each other. We turn our transmitters on, our receivers off. And as I said, this absolutism has really polarized everything in our people. And the American people look at it and shake their heads and say, my God. We'll come out of this, I really believe.
In your view, do you think we are dealing effectively, and should we be dealing more forcefully with A, the Chinese in the South and East China Sea, and B, with Vladimir Putin in Ukraine and the Russian near abroad?
I have said often that the one relationship the United States has to get right as we get deeper and deeper into this new century is the China relationship. And this is going to continue to be a complicated relationship for the reasons you all know. I am not one who believes that China is the emerging, dominant, great power of the 21st century, that everyone will cower in the wake of the big dragon. It is a great power. It'll continue to be a great power for all the reasons we know. China has immense problems, internal problems, immense. There is no transparency in that place. And what they have done to their country in the last 50 years, the environment, there's no rule of law, there's no incentive for innovation, there's corruption at the highest, lowest levels, and so on. So that's my point about the little green book, assets, liabilities. But here's what you don't want, in my opinion, in the United States. Fundamentally, every president has to be careful with this. Don't let the small problems become big problems. Don't let the big issues get out of control. We have differences with China, and I dealt directly with the Chinese. I was in China for 8 days last year, and had meetings with Xi and all of them, and spoke rather plainly about the East China Sea and South China Sea. This has to be handled smartly, but it also is fundamentally an issue where the Chinese or any other potential competitor, and they are a competitor, or certainly potential adversary, has to recognize the strength of America. A country only has one fundamental strength, and that's the economic strength. Now, fortunately, America has something stronger than that, and most Western democracies do, that we're a nation of laws. So people aren't trying to get out of the United States to go live in China or anywhere else in the world. People are trying to get into the United States and out of China and everywhere else in the world. And so that tells you something. But strength, our economy, because you can't have a strong military or a strong anything without a strong economy. We know that. Look what happened to the Soviets. So my point is, we have to be wise in how we handle the Chinese on these issues. The other part of this is allies. I mentioned I'd been in the Asia Pacific 6 times in 2 years. Told you what I was doing over there. Spent a lot of time with those leaders. Strengthen our allies so that they have confidence in what we're doing. We give them more capacity to deal with themselves. China's a huge monolithic country that they all have to live with. We're 5,000 miles away. We're a Pacific power, yes. But something you said earlier about you cannot put countries in a position with this simplistic qualifier. You're either with us or you're against us. You're either for us or you're against us. Oh boy, we might be a little surprised. You start talking about that, when you start telling people, especially when it comes to China in that part of the world. Now, they don't trust China. They may not like China. They've had to live with them for centuries. But they're pretty clever operators, and the trade and all the rest. Russia, I think Putin is driving Russia into a ditch. He is isolating Russia. He is doing great damage to Russia. This eventually will come out. But don't let things get out of hand here, where we get ourselves into a situation where it's a showdown.
I know everybody's been asking about, what is America's leadership? But going on ethical leadership, what was your kind of leadership style? What were your tactics? What was your kind of personalized view on leadership from Vietnam all the way to being the top man of the military? Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir.
My style approach is pretty fundamental, pretty simple. First, always be straight up. When I say that, that means with everybody around you. Honest, open, transparent, involve everybody. I used to say when I'd go to different bases around the world, and I'd go back in the kitchens and I'd talk to the drivers, and everybody's job in the military, every job in the military is important. There is not one unimportant job. If for no other reason, and you guys understand this, and those who have been in the military do, but it transcends all institutions. If you have one weak link in that chain, you got a weak chain. You got a weak chain. Always respect everybody and listen carefully to everybody. I don't care how smart you think you are, you're not near as smart as you think you are. And you will be proven that over and over again. Know that you got something to learn from everybody. But I think really it's so important to bring everybody in to the process. Everybody has a say, everybody feels like they have a role. And you let people manage. That's the other thing. That's a fundamental tenet. Pick good people, because everything starts with people. I mean, I don't care how fancy an institution is or how many degrees or any of that. And I tell kids all the time when they can't get into a school that, I can't get into this fancy school. I said, that makes a difference. It's what you do with it. It's what you do with your degree, wherever you go to school. And that's up to you. That's not up to Yale or Harvard or Rice or any place else. It's you, my friend, you. But a fundamental, though I've always found, is you trust people. You pick good people, you trust them, let them do their job. Now, they're accountable. You hold them accountable. because we're all accountable. There's nobody not accountable in the world. We're all accountable to somebody or a board. As Secretary of Defense, people would say, well, that's a complicated. Yeah, I said, well, it's the most complicated institution in the world. It's the largest enterprise in the world, the Defense Department, by any measurement. And I said, what was really complicated is that I had a board of directors of 535 people, 100 senators, 435 House members. Then I had a chairman of the board down at the other end, wasn't even in the same office as me or the board. That's the president. And so you talk about complications. But hold people accountable, let them do their jobs, have confidence in them, listen to them, and treat people with respect. Those are fundamental. They're as old as probably as anything. But they are tried, tested, proven, and you can never go wrong with them. You can never go wrong with them.
That has to be the perfect note in which to end. You've spoken with great candor and honesty and ethical judgment. And the last thing I want to say to prove the individuality of this guest of ours is that he was made, I believe, an admiral in the Nebraska Navy. Think that one through, and please join me in thanking him.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
That was great.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.